Patch 25, get the CRJ in flight. Patch 25, pass behind the CRJ. Good separate.
American 4782 by Baton, now for visual.
American 472, Washington, 1 star, 32017.
Wind. Did you see that?
All right, strap yourselves in for this one because you guys requested it. We're going deep on the midair collision over the Potomac.
Yeah, we're going to be breaking down those ATC recordings from that night.
It's heavy stuff. This one's going to stick with you, I think.
It's a tough listen for sure, but it's, you know, as we always say, these incidents, they really highlight, you know, what can go wrong up there.
And how to avoid it, hopefully.
Right, exactly.
So picture this. Reagan National Airport at night, DCA.
Oh, yeah. Do you see that?
Busy airspace. We've got planes lined up for landings, departures getting ready. And one of those departures is a Black Hawk helicopter.
A Black Hawk.
Call sign Pat 25.
Pat 25, okay.
Now, Pat 25 is requesting clearance to take off, and ATC is doing their thing, alerting them about traffic.
Right, making sure everybody's aware.
In this case, there's a CRJ on approach to runway 33.
Standard procedure.
Totally. But here's where things get interesting. Pat 25 acknowledges the CRJ, but then they request visual separation.
Visual separation meaning...
They're taking responsibility for seeing and avoiding that CRJ.
All right, so they're saying, we got this, we'd see the traffic, we'll maintain safe distance.
Exactly. It's a common procedure, but it puts a lot of trust in the pilot making the request.
Yeah, you got to have a really good grasp of what's happening around you up there.
And let's just say things don't go as planned. We're going to actually hear that moment of impact.
Oh, wow.
Captured on the ATC recording, so...
Okay.
Fair warning, it's a tough listen.
It is, yeah, but it's these moments that really underscore the gravity of what we're talking about.
For sure. Okay, so here's the clip. Listen closely to what Pat 25 says and how the tower responds.
Okay.
Sound of ATC audio with Pat 25 requesting and receiving visual separation. A faint "oh" can be heard from the controller, followed by static, and then calls to emergency services.
Oh my gosh.
You can just hear it, right?
Yeah, you can just hear the realization in his voice.
Right, that "oh" from the controller.
And then the shift right away to emergency response, it's remarkable.
It's incredible how quickly they snap into action, right?
Training takes over, you know.
Directing those other aircraft away, coordinating with emergency services.
You have to put aside your own emotions and just focus on the task at hand.
Absolutely. But let's rewind a bit and talk about what might have led to this. Why didn't Pat 25 see the CRJ? I mean, they specifically requested visual separation.
That's the big question, isn't it? And based on the ATC recordings and the radar data, it seems likely that Pat 25 misidentified the CRJ.
Misidentified, so they were looking at the wrong plane.
It seems that way they may have fixated on an aircraft that was further back in the landing sequence.
So like tunnel vision almost.
Yeah, it's called target fixation, and it's more common than you might think.
I mean, I can see how that could happen up there with so much going on.
You get focused on one thing and you miss other critical details.
Yeah.
It's like when you're driving and you're so focused on the car in front of you that you miss a pedestrian.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Same principle applies in the air.
So Pat 25 might have locked onto that other aircraft and thought it was the CRJ.
Exactly. And you have to remember, it was nighttime DCA surrounded by city lights. The CRJ being closer and lower might have been harder to see against that background.
Right, harder to pick out. But wouldn't the instruments have helped? Like the altitude readings and all that?
Sure, they have instruments to help to navigate, but this incident just shows how important human perception still is.
Especially when you're relying on visual separation.
Right.
So even with clear instructions and all the tech, there's still that human element.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought for sure. And it brings up a crucial question. If experienced pilots can fall victim to this, how do we mitigate that risk?
Yeah.
What can we learn?
Yeah, how do we prevent that from happening again? I guess that's for part 2 of our deep dive.
Well, you know, when we talk about mitigating risk like that, you're really talking about the investigation process.
Right, getting to the bottom of what happened.
Exactly. And with target fixation, it's a bit tricky because you can't just, you know, read a pilot's mind.
Right, how do you study something like that?
Well, investigators, they've got these impressive techniques. They use a combination of data analysis simulations, even cognitive psychology.
Wow, so they're really trying to understand the mental processes that led to the error?
That's the goal. They want to see if there were any pre-existing factors that contributed.
So it's not just looking at the radar tracks. It's looking at the pilot's history, their training records, maybe even psychological profiles.
Right. You have to look at the whole picture, the entire context in which this error occurred.
And I imagine that leads to some pretty specific recommendations.
Oh, yeah. There were some significant changes made after this collision.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest was enhanced training for pilots, specifically on visual separation techniques, with a big focus on recognizing and avoiding target fixation.
So they're actually teaching pilots how to deal with that tunnel vision.
Exactly. It's a combination of classroom instruction simulator exercises and even in-flight practice.
Wow, so it's pretty comprehensive.
It has to be. They teach pilots to constantly scan the airspace, verify their assumptions, use all available resources, their instruments, their communication with ATC.
So it's all about staying vigilant, not getting complacent.
Right. Always double-checking, questioning what you see.
And I imagine communication is a big part of that, too.
Oh, absolutely. They really emphasize open communication between pilots and controllers, encouraging pilots to speak up. You have any doubts?
You don't want pilots to be afraid to ask questions.
No, not at all. That could be disastrous.
Yeah.
Open communication is critical for safety.
I mean, even if it feels like a silly question, better safe than sorry.
Right, exactly. Now, besides the training, there were some big changes in technology and infrastructure, too.
Oh, yeah. I remember you mentioned how the CRJ might have been hard to see against the city lights.
Right, it kind of blended into the background.
So what did they do about that?
Well, the FAA implemented new standards for aircraft lighting and markings.
So they made the planes themselves easier to see.
Exactly. Yeah. Brighter lights, more contrast. And they also invested in upgrading radar systems and air traffic control displays.
So the controllers have a clearer picture of what's happening up there.
It's all about giving them the best tools possible to monitor traffic and spot potential conflicts.
Makes sense. It's amazing how this one incident led to so many changes.
It really is. It shows how seriously the aviation industry takes safety. They see every accident as an opportunity to learn and make flying safer.
And for those of us who fly, it's reassuring to know that.
They're constantly looking for ways to improve.
But even with all these improvements, I keep thinking about that moment in the recording that, from the controller, what happens next? On the ground, I mean...
Oh, yeah. Well, that's when things shift from preventing the collision to managing the aftermath.
Right.
DCA pretty much shuts down, all flights are grounded, and the emergency response teams take over.
Wow. So it goes from, this tense situation in the tower to a whole different kind of chaos on the ground.
It's a very difficult transition for everyone involved.
Especially for those controllers.
They have to completely shift their focus from managing air traffic to coordinating with emergency services, providing information, and ensuring the safety of the responders.
All under immense pressure.
And scrutiny. Yeah, it's a lot to handle.
I imagine there's a lot of stress and emotion in those moments.
There is.
Yeah.
And, we've been talking about the pilots and controllers, but we can't forget about the passengers on that CRJ, their families.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, you're right. There's a whole other layer to this tragedy.
The human impact that goes beyond the immediate scene of the accident.
And that's something that's easy to overlook when we're focused on the technical aspects of aviation.
Right. We get caught up in the procedures, the technology, the regulations.
But at the end of the day, it's all about people.
It is their lives, their families, their communities.
And the choices we make, both in the cockpit and on the ground, can have these devastating consequences.
And that's why it's so important to learn from these incidents, to keep pushing for improvements, to never become complacent.
So even though flying is statistically one of the safest forms of transportation, we can't let our guard down.
No, we can't, because even one accident is one too many.
And that's where the work of the investigators, the researchers, the safety advocates, it all comes together.
They're the ones who help us understand what went wrong and how to do better.
And for the listener out there who might be feeling a bit uneasy after hearing all of this, what would you say to them? How can we as passengers contribute to a safer flying experience?
Well, while we can't control what happens in the cockpit, we can certainly be informed and engaged passengers.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It starts with being aware of the risks.
Yeah.
Understanding the procedures, paying attention to the safety briefings,
right,
and respecting the crew following their instructions.
So it's about being an active participant, not just a passive passenger.
Exactly. And if you're ever concerned about something, don't hesitate to speak up.
Ask questions, share your observations.
Because ultimately, safety is a shared responsibility.
We all have a role to play.
We do. We're all part of this complex system, and our actions, no matter how small, they can make a difference.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, though. Definitely a somber one.
Yeah, it's a tough topic, but an important one.
We've explored the complexities of visual separation, delved into the world of aviation investigation, and discussed the far-reaching impact of this collision.
And we've seen how the industry has learned from this tragedy and made changes to prevent it from happening again.
But there's still one question on my mind. From the controller, and then everything shifts to what's happening on the ground.
Right. Yeah, the immediate response.
But then what? What happens after the emergency responders leave and...
Well, that's when the real investigation kicks in. I mean, a major incident like this, it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, I bet.
You've got experts from all these different agencies and organizations trying to piece together what happened.
It's almost like a crime scene investigation, right?
Well, absolutely. They treat it just like a forensic investigation, analyzing every piece of data, interviewing witnesses.
I imagine they have to reconstruct the accident using, like, simulations and stuff.
They do. They use simulations. They even physically reconstruct the accident scene if they have to.
Wow, so it's a really thorough process.
It has to be. And remember, the goal isn't to find someone to blame.
Right, it's to figure out how to prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. The aviation industry's got this long history of learning from mistakes.
Yeah, they take safety very seriously.
They do. Every incident becomes a case study, a way to improve protocols and training.
So even though this was a terrible tragedy, something positive came out of it.
Oh, for sure. The findings from this investigation, they led to some major changes in pilot training, ATC procedures, even aircraft design.
And those changes have probably saved countless lives.
No doubt about it. It's like this ripple effect. One event can impact so many people and lead to these lasting improvements.
It's incredible to think about, really.
And those ripple effects, they go beyond just the technical stuff, too. There are the families of the victims, the pilots, the controllers, the investigators.
Yeah, those are the real human costs of these accidents.
It's easy to get lost in the data and the analysis, but we have to remember that there's this immense human cost that can't really be measured.
And that's a good reminder for all of us, really, that safety, it's not just about numbers.
No, it's about people's lives.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. We've gone deep into this collision, explored all the complexities, and, talked about the consequences.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. So what are you taking away from all of this?
Well, I hope it's made you curious. Maybe sparked a desire to learn more about how aviation works.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world.
It is. And the more we understand it, the more we can appreciate the work that goes into keeping us safe.
Because even though these accidents are rare,
Incredibly rare.
they do happen.
And when they do, we have to learn from them.
And remember that we all have a role to play in safety.
Whether you're a pilot, a controller, a passenger, we're all part of this system.
And our actions, even the small ones, can make a difference.
So next time you're at the airport, take a moment to look around, appreciate the people who make flying possible.
And never stop learning.
Yeah, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, keep striving for a safer future in the skies.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely. And until next time, safe travels, everyone.